Today we're going to do a real quick dive into buttons and how they're used in Foundation for emails. So let's get to it. Basic button in an email is simply, an area that we click on to take us to an external URL, and that's created with a button tag. We just simply use the HTML5 button tag with an href. We can apply styles to that if we want to, but bringing it down to just the very basic elements, what you see here is all you need for a button. But keep in mind that a lot of the email clients, if you do have a clickable area or have a button in there, make sure you have the href defined and it's valid. You can't just have it blank because some of the email clients don't render it properly unless you have that href attribute in there. The class attributes, as you'll see later on, are added to change the size, colors, all kinds of other things for the buttons. But if you want just the default button to get started with, you can go ahead and use the code as you see here. So let's dive into some of the code. Let's take a look at it. And I'll bring up a browser as well. What I've got here is a very simple HTML email. This is in Inky, not the generated HTML. And what I've got here is a container. I've got a row, a column that goes all the way across, and I got a title that just gives me the title at the top. For the button, just like we saw in the slide, I've just got the button text here, and when it renders in the default color that is here. Now the default colors, if you dive into the settings.scss file, let's open this up a little bit more so we can take a look. It uses some of the colors here that are defined in section 1 of the SASS file, essentially. And you can modify that if you want to, and I'll show you some examples of that. I'm just going to copy and paste in some stuff I did before. I think I did that here. So here what I've done is I've pasted in some stuff I've already written, and what I've got here is the button. That's just your standard button. I'll get rid of the standard one down at the bottom here. Then we've got some other ones that I've put into their own column, and what we can do with adding classes to buttons is we can use a secondary, success, warning, and alert to generate different colors for these buttons. Now these colors, they're a named reference to these, and let me tell you what I mean by that. If we go back to here, named colors, in your settings.scss file, as I showed you in section 1, you've got a number of SASS variables here, and you have color codes that are assigned. And you can change those however you want to. And what's nice about doing that is anywhere you have a class of, say, alert, or we've got here, you can see secondary, success, warning, alert. Anytime you use that, it'll automatically generate the colors, and you'll see these here on the right-hand side of the slide. So you got secondaries, success, warning, and alert. So if you have a theme you've already developed, you're working with a designer or you're doing it yourself, you can go ahead and change those colors to match your theme, and you won't have to worry again about what color code you're adding. When you're coding the page, you just can add in here alert, secondary, warning, whatever you want. So it makes it really nice for being able to create consistent emails, especially if you're doing a whole bunch of them at once or doing a whole set of email campaigns that have to have some kind of consistency. So let's go back and take a look at that again. And I will regenerate this. Oh, I didn't save it. And there we see the colors here generated. So pretty simple. You can make those any colors you want using the color codes. Next piece, let's take a look at, is button sizes. Once again, in your settings.scss file, in section 5, we have a number of SASS variables here, but we've broken them out with attributes. So for instance, your tiny button, they give named sizes for these buttons. So you've got tiny, small, default, and large. And in doing so, if you can change the padding for them, you can change the font size for each of those sizes of buttons. And as you can see in the lower right-hand side, they will scale upwards based on those parameters you put in here. You can also play around. We'll see it in just a minute. Section 5 also has some attributes in here for the radius, for rounding over the corners. Then you've got button margins and colors, all that good stuff. So a lot of the SASS things you've come to use elsewhere come into play here. Let's take a look at that in the code. Let's bring up that, bring up this. And I'm going to go over to my completed one, and I'm going to drop in the button sizes here. And I've got some code here to cut and paste in, because it makes it much easier than watching me type all this stuff and get typos. I've got a header up here, so we can ignore that piece. But the different sizes right here are shown with the different rows. And let me highlight the piece here. Here's the button. And the only thing that's different about it is called class of tiny. And this will make a very small button. Then you've got a class small. I've left the class, if you leave it blank, you'll get the default button. So you don't have to define it to get the default size. And that's why it works just fine with our standard buttons up at the top here. And then you can have a large button, but just a class large. So I'm going to save that. And then let's wait for this to refresh. And here we are. Here's our button sizes, just like we saw it. Now what's nice about this is you can actually combine some of the classes. So if we have small warning, if I save that, now you'll see here we have our warning color as an example up here, but here I've got a small button from a size perspective, but it's also added the warning color set. And I could do the same thing here for the large if I want to do large and success. Save it. And now we have a green one because it picks up the color. So you can add this classes and you'll have the additive effect of how it's rendered. All right, let's head on over to button alignment. And alignment's always kind of a challenge. It depends on obviously on the email client you're using, but oftentimes you'll find alignments to be one of the more challenging things to try to get working properly. Left aligned buttons are the default. So if you leave everything out, just put in a basic button tag with an href, that's what you're going to get. It's a left aligned button. Centering it is a little bit different. You use the center tag. So we wrap the button in a center tag set, and you'll get a centered button. Not surprising. Right align is a little bit different, and there's some issues with that. And what you can do is, as you see here, as you can see here in the slide, you've got a button, href, class align right. Now that class is something I have defined. So let's take a look at this in the code. I'll bring up the browser as well. I'm going to jump over to my completed ones again, copy these over here. Go down at the bottom of the container here, drop those in. And just for the sake of readability, I'm going to go ahead and add just a little bar in here so we can see it all, see where the separation is. So we got a title, and here's our left one, and it says just a button tag, href, nothing else, give you a left button. Centering. Now if you're used to doing these emails, if you've done these before, you'll know that one of the ways to center text is to add class equals text center. All right. And that will work for text, not so much for buttons. So what you really need to do is to wrap the buttons in a center tag, and doing that will give you that centered alignment. The right hand, though, as we saw in the slide, we have a custom class called Align Right. And what we've done with Align Right up here, because the rendered output is actually going to be in a table, what we can do is we'll use this class right here, this definition, table.button.alignRight. The align right is what we have defined in our tag, but it actually, when it's rendered, it shows up under the table.button class hierarchy. And we set a display of inline block, and we float it right, and that'll take care of it for us. So you really need to have both the align right set up, but also in your style sheet. And when you're done, you get this. And as we can see, it's going to be, I've got some width set in the body area, but it will try its best to ensure that it's left, centered, and right, even though you change the size of the browser window, or the email client or screen size changes. All right, let's check out the next one. This is expanded buttons. Oftentimes people want to have a button that spans the full width of the container, and this is usually on mobile devices. Oftentimes you want to have a smaller one on the desktop because you can actually have more accuracy from a pointing perspective, so you can have a smaller button for the user. But then on the, when you want to have it on a mobile device, you want to have a larger button so they can have more real estate to click on. So to do that, if you want to, again, we're using the centered one as an example here, but we simply add the class of expanded to the button, and that will give us the full width expanded button. So in the example on the right-hand side, we've got a regular button here for comparison, but then we have the expanded button. And then if you want to play around with things a little bit, you can just expand it with buffer columns, and that's just you play around with the number of cells, so to speak, that you're using in your design for your design grid, and you can put on the large size, and I'll show you this in a minute, you'll put some placeholder columns. So that kind of gives you a little bit of a buffer. You can also play around with padding and such. I found this technique to be a little easier, although when you do change the width of the browser, you will get the columns on either side to align to go to the top and bottom. But I'll show you that in just a minute. Now you can also conditionally expand a button using the small dash expanded class. And that's really nice because you can define your button just as is, but you can only have it expand for mobile devices. With Foundation for emails, we have two breakpoints. We have a small and a large. So for the large, generally it's going to be your desktop, so you can use a regular button. And then if you have this class, the small dash expanded, it'll only give you the expanded one when you're on the mobile device. So that's pretty handy. So let's take a look at the code for that. And once again, let me go over here, grab my expanded button stuff, go back over. And we have some expanded buttons starting right here, around line 99 to 100. And I've got the regular button here. It's centered, using the center tags around it. But then to jump down to the expanded one, all I've done is added the class of expanded. And if I save this, let's take a look at how that looks. Here at the bottom here, you can see how that works, how it looks. So I've got the regular button, the expanded button, expanded with columns, and I'll show you that in a second. But as you change this, that expanded button at the bottom will automatically just keep on keeping on. It'll try its best to stay the width of the container. So that's really cool. If you want it to be only for small, to expand for small, I'll show you that one. So So we'll take our expanded button, small dash expanded. Now this one jumps down to, back down to the normal size for a regular button. But if I squeeze the stuff down, and it's not working. Did I type something wrong here? I don't know. Small expanded. Well, I will come back to that and see how it works. All right, well, the one with expanded with the buffer columns, that's what we see right here. I'm going to put some, let me put some space in here to bring that up a little higher for you. What I've got right here going on is we have the row is still, it's all one row still, but we've got three different columns. We've got a column on the left, we've got a column on the right. I'll separate them out a little bit. And we got the content column in the middle. And what I've done is I've said for the small and large dimensions, small and large breakpoints, I set it for a size of 1. It's going to be 1 grid cell. And I just add a non-breaking space in there. And then for the middle part, because we're on a 12-cell grid for these emails right now, I say for the small I use 10, large I use 10, and I throw the centered button. Now I'm doing expanded. It's an expanded button as well, but because I have those other columns, the center button is only going to take up the width of the container. Now I'm going to take this small expanded out again. I'm not sure what's going on there. And you can see the difference between the two. You've got the expanded one that goes full width, and this one will only go the width of the center column. Now there's a little bit of a catch with this, because what happens is when you shrink things down, those two columns, the right and left columns, with one, the empty ones, they will jump to the top and the bottom, because it tries to shrink things down and move those columns from a horizontal alignment, all the way across to more of a vertical. So that does tend to jump. So you'll see that. You'll see it jump right there because those cells will move around. So you do get that effect. Now, if you like that effect, if you want the spacing there if you have a whole bunch of buttons and you want some spacing, that's kind of nice because that allows you to give you some spacing on the small devices. But trust me when I say that other one here, this small expanded, it will work on the small screen sizes and will automatically show the smaller one on large desktop, and it will expand it only for the small screen. Now rounded buttons, pretty simple. You look in section 5, and we'll take a look at that in a second. Section 5 has all of the settings for this. And to add a radius, the difference between the radius button and the rounded button is really the degree to which the corners are rounded. The radius button gives you more of a chamfered look, where the rounded one will give you more of a pill look for the button. And now, one of the big things here, one of the big things I want to point out here is that it's not supported by Outlook 2000 through 2013, Yahoo Mail, or the Android 4 Plus Gmail. So be sure to test this stuff out properly. If you're kind of banking on the fact that you're going to have this nice rounded button everywhere, that's probably kind of an unreasonable expectation. If you're targeting ones that do support it, great. If not, what will happen is it will just simply degrade to a square boxed button. But where it is supported, you'll get the nice rounded radius or rounded buttons. So let's take a look at that. I'm going to throw some spacers in here. Pull it down a little bit. And again, here we've got, I'll save it, and we've got our radius button. All we've done is add the class of radius and the class of rounded. And because we're in a browser, not an email client, it works just fine. We'll get a chamfered one here, and we got the rounded one at the bottom. And just like all the other ones, if you wanted to make, add some colors, you can add alert. Now, you can also add your own classes. I mean, that's obviously something you can always do as a developer, but it's just nice having some of those predefined ones there. You can change the color to make them consistent. And then the radius one, we could add a secondary class, and they'll get the secondary color. So easy enough. So if your design calls for it, great, you can use that, but know that it's only going to work on some of the email clients, and it will degrade back to a squared button. One of the things that I was asked at one point was image backgrounds for buttons. This was something I had to do for work. They wanted to have a gradient or some special things, and we really wanted to use an image. What they needed was complex enough to be an image, so I said, all right, let's try it out. And it seems to work just fine. I used a class of large, and I added a separate class of my own called image button 1, and I added this code to the style sheet, and it worked just fine. So let's take a look at that. So down here, I'm just going to skip the title stuff I had. And I think I'm going to throw this at the top just so I can keep things consistent for you here so we can see it. What I've got here is I made, again, a large button, and I made a separate class, and I put this in my app.css file over here called image1. And let's take a look. I'll squeeze things over here, and let's take a look at that. And right down here, the generated code for the button background is I just simply had table.button.imageButton1 td, because the button is actually a cell in a table. I had background image. I defined a URL for that background image, and I took the border away. The buttons generally will always have a border, and that's one of the settings you can set. And as I mentioned before, in section 5, right here, this has all of the button stuff. And one of the areas that you can change is the button border. So you can change the button, make it this generally to 2 pixels solid, and it's whatever the button background color is. But you can make it a different color if you want to highlight things. But I just turned it off for the image button. And when I go to save, I'll save this for you. And here's my image button. It's not a good example. I'll refresh if it changes. There we go. That's a good one. I'm pulling it from a content source, so it'll just randomly grab an image, but for the example. But you can put in whatever image you need. I would make sure that you scale the image or make sure the image you're using is roughly the same size as the button. I had to experiment with this, and I was given some very large images, and it just didn't work too well because you're only getting a portion of the image as the background. But it works, as you can see, it works just fine. You can click it, it works great. So if you have the need for it, it is there. You can do it. You do have to do a little of your own coding here, but you can make it all work. The final thing I wanted to go over was image maps. Something else that someone, again, one of the people at work asked me, hey, can we do image maps in emails? They wanted to have some clickable areas within an image. And they do work. You can set up image maps. That most all email clients will recognize some of the older HTML tags, and it works great. The problem is it will not be responsive. And because most of the responsive image map solutions, they rely on JavaScript to rescale the coordinates for those maps. With JavaScript's not available, it doesn't scale, so you really don't have any responsiveness to it. So it will work, but I probably would not recommend it because it's not going to scale well for the different devices. So that is it. Thank you for watching, and if you have any questions, please let me know. Thanks a lot.